Hey, this is Scott Laird with D'Addario. It's great to be with you today for this video. I want to talk a little bit in this video about the transition between electric violin and acoustic violin. Most of you will have started by playing the acoustic violin and then want to pick up the electric violin afterwards as you see some of the things that can be done with it. So let's just talk a little bit about that transition. Some of the first questions that I get all the time about electric violin involve some of the accessories. For instance, people ask me all the time what kind of strings I use on my electric violins. Well, the first thing to know is that electric violins use traditional violin strings. I use D'Addario Zyx strings on my electric violins. They sound great, they work great, and they're very, very responsive. People also want to know what kind of bow you use with an electric violin. Use your traditional bow. I happen to use a Coda bow, the Joule bow, and I like it a lot with my electric violins. Everyone's a little bit different. A few years ago, I was working with Jean-Luc Ponty, and he suggested that I try using a viola bow with my electric violin. And on some of the music I play, I use a viola bow because it gets a little more weight to the sound. It's a little meatier sound. So depending on the music that I'm playing, I sometimes use a viola bow with my electric violins. Some of the other questions that I frequently get from teachers, one of the big questions I get is it a crutch to play an electric violin? In other words, is it easier to play an electric violin than it is to play an acoustic violin? And my answer is very definitively no. The electric violin is not a crutch. In fact, a bad violin player with an electric violin is a bad violin player louder, okay? So electric violins, you have to have good technique and be able to produce a good tone on your acoustic violin in order to get a good tone on your electric violin. All of the principles of tone production for an acoustic instrument really remain the same for an electric. So having a nice bow arm, having a nice perpendicular bow stroke, perpendicular to the strings, is really vital. Having your bow placed appropriately in relationship to the bridge is vital to producing a great sound on the electric violin. So that's really important to know. The electric violin is simply like an acoustic violin turned up, okay? So we want that to be very, very clear. Some people think the minute they pick up an electric violin that they should be playing rock music or jazz music as opposed to traditional classical music. And I would emphatically say that that's not necessary. Absolutely, with an electric violin, we sometimes improvise or play musical styles that are new to us and different. But let me stress to you that at least initially when you get an electric violin, start by playing music that's familiar to you. You might have noticed that I started this video by playing just the last little phrase in the piece Humoresque from the Suzuki, I think it's book 3 in Suzuki. And I always recommend that the first things you play on your electric violin be pieces that you're familiar with, stuff that you're comfortable with. There's lots of ways to use electric violins with classical music. If you're learning to improvise, then learn to improvise. That doesn't necessarily have to happen on an electric, but trying to do two new things at one time can be a little bit frustrating. So I recommend that you get used to the electric, playing music and literature that you know, and then maybe incorporate the new things in afterwards. One of the really kind of most difficult things to get used to with an electric violin is the fact that the sound is not coming from the instrument. When I'm plugged in, the instrument itself, if I turn the amp down, the instrument itself doesn't make much sound. I have to turn the volume up at the amplifier. Now, in the studio where I'm recording this video, the amplifier is behind me about 3 or 4 feet, and it's not right at my left ear where I'm used to having my acoustic violin speaking. This can be one of the most frustrating parts of playing an electric violin for the first time. Playing it, and the sound is coming from back there. There are a couple of ways to remedy this. One is just practice. You just kind of get used to having the sound at a different place. But if you're playing in maybe a large group or someplace where you really do need to hear yourself personally, I recommend using a small monitor. A lot of times when I'm playing with a large group, I'll let my sound be wherever it needs to be in the room, but I'll use a small monitor right up here at my left ear, pretty close to the electric violin, that lets me hear that violin more like a traditional acoustic violin right beside me. For anybody that's playing electric for the first time, make sure that the amp is up off the ground. If you just have a violin and an amplifier, have it up off the ground and close to your ear so that you hear it the way you hear a normal violin. I think one of the biggest frustrations that people have with electric violins is that they don't always play with all of the great dynamics that we learn to play on our acoustic instruments, and that's because we can't hear the amplifier properly. So get your amp or your monitor to a place where you can really hear it accurately, and you will play much more dynamically and be a much better player. You'll play in better tune as well. Electric violins can be played in first position and upper positions, but again, when you first pick up the electric violin, I really recommend that initially you really just practice making a great tone in first position. If you've watched any of the other videos that we've placed here on the website, you know that tone is #1. So I recommend you get really good at playing great tone in first position and then move into your upper positions later. You'll have a lot more success. I hope that some of these tips have been helpful to you and that you have real success playing the electric violin.